it's been so long ago, and the the experience has been colored by many, many different layers of how difficult it was to make the film, and then how disappointing it was to release the film and have no one in America really enjoy it except people as crazy as Bob, and myself, and John Milius. It's a very nice, small, insane group that appreciates 1941. Of course, the Europeans love it, and I tend to, to go over there to really hear what that film meant to them more than it meant to Americans. It meant a lot to some Americans, but mainly the film was sort of dismissed as a picture that, was the inevitable conclusion to two great hits for me. It was inevitable that I would make a film that wasn't such a big hit, and I never looked on the analysis that way. A lot of the analysis actually faulted the film for being too chaotic and too noisy. And in fact, I think looking back on the movie, one of the most enjoyable things about the film for me is that the film is pretty much no different than playing Doom 2 or on your computer today. It really is a blast in the face of imagery and sound and crazy people and over-the-top performances and clash of cultures and ideals and revisionist history. So the whole film sort of I think, was way ahead of its time, coming out in 1979, but perhaps was a little more current to today's CD-ROM super information highway generation.
The two Bobs came to my office right out of SC, and they were big fans of mine, and they wanted to do a movie, and they were struggling, and they wanted to do a movie called Bordello of Blood, which was a vampire horror sex movie. And we talked about that and everything, and we got kind of carried away with that. And then I guess I met them then, and they just sort of hung around and stuff, and they were so full of energy and everything, and Steven was always around, so he kind of got infected with their energy, and they wrote something. I don't remember what they wrote before 1941, but they wrote something else before that. They wrote a script called Tank. They showed me a script called Tank, and it was pretty darn good too.
We had written a screenplay called Tank, and it was another movie made called that, but it wasn't our story. And we gave that screenplay to John because we had known John because of the USC Film School connection. And John read the screenplay. He wasn't crazy about the story, but he liked the way we wrote. And he said, "Have you guys got any other ideas for any other movies?" And we said, "Well, we thought we immediately came up with this outrageous concept of hysteria on the home front during World War II." And I have to credit John. It's my recollection that John thought of the title, and he said, "Hey, that's a great idea, and we'll call it The Night the Japs Attacked."
Bob Zemeckis and I wrote a script called Tank on spec. We were running around trying to get it off the ground, hawking it here and there. And one of the people we gave it to was John Milius. Milius had gone to USC Film School, so we felt comfortable with the USC connections. And, "Hey, we went to SC. You went to SC. Would you read our script?" So John read the script, and he called us into his office. And he said, "Boys, this script demonstrates a great sense of social irresponsibility, and I'd like to hire you to write a script for me, do for you what Francis Coppola did for me." Coppola hired Milius to write Apocalypse Now when Milius shortly got out of film school. So he asked us if we had any ideas for movies, and we told him that we had come across, in researching Tank, we'd come across this very fascinating historical event where the city of Los Angeles it was actually in February 1942, thought that there was an air raid, that the Japanese were bombing LA. They blacked out the city for 6 hours, and thousands of rounds of ammunition were shot up at the sky at nothing. And we thought it was just a wonderfully absurd historical event, could make a great movie. Well, it turns out that John Milius had been researching a script about General Joseph Stilwell. This was about the time where Patton had come out in the early 70s, and the time frame of this, by the way, was 1975. So every studio wanted to do a movie about a general. So Milius said, "Hey, let's do General Stilwell." And Stilwell had been stationed in California during the outbreak of World War II, and there were a lot of false alarms right after Pearl Harbor. So Milius was, being a history buff and knowing about Stilwell, he was very familiar with these incidents. And it was Milius who said, yeah, we can put General Stilwell in this movie. He could be running around being the voice of sanity and all this insane stuff. Milius had finished making a movie called The Wind and the Lion at MGM, and MGM loved the movie and had signed Milius to a 4-picture deal. 2 of the pictures Milius was going to write and direct, and 2 of the pictures he was going to produce. So he hired Bob and me to write one of the pictures that he was going to produce, and he said the title of it should be The Night the Japs Attacked. And for the first year and a half of it or so, that was what the title was. Researching the script, both Bob and myself immersed ourselves totally in the 1940s. I went down to the downtown LA library every day. I didn't have a car at the time. I'd ride my bike down there, and I'd spend 7 or 8 hours a day in the history department just reading and absorbing old magazines and books and all kinds of period stuff. And we were watching old movies, listening to records, listening to music of the time, big band stuff. The Anderson sisters, of course, are in the movie as a reference to the real Andrews sisters, who were about the most popular singing group at the time. And one of the things that we noticed in the old movies from the 40s was they would say, buy war bonds at this theater. And we thought that would be a great thing to end the movie with, to have a card come up to say, buy war bonds at this theater, to put everybody in the 40s frame of mind. Never ended up there, but you just write all this stuff in a script because it's fun and you can, and paper's cheap. We combined a number of historical events into one big mess in 1941. And among what those events really were, first of all, there really was a Japanese submarine that shelled the coast of California. This took place actually in February 1942. The submarine, the great story about it is that this was a submarine, or the captain of the submarine had been an oil tanker captain, and he had come to Santa Barbara a lot, to the Standard Oil facility there, to buy oil from the United States. One day when he came ashore, the executives of Standard Oil were treating him like an important dignitary from a foreign country, as was a custom, and they were escorting him up the path from the beach, and he slipped and he fell into a patch of cactus right on his ass. And some people laughed at him, and he suffered a tremendous loss of face. Very bad thing in the Japanese culture. The story goes that this guy was the captain of this submarine, and rather than actually shell the refinery, as I remember it now, it was a Richfield refinery, not a Standard Oil refinery, rather than shell the refinery, which could have caused some serious damage, he shot shells at the section of the coastline where he had tripped and fallen on the cactus to sort of make everything okay with what had happened 10 years earlier. The Japanese actually had a plan to have all 12 of their submarines up and down the west coast of the United States on Christmas Eve. They were all going to open fire, and it was going to be a big psychologically demoralizing blow to the United States. They didn't care where they hit anything, but just the idea that there could be 12 enemy subs right off the west coast of America, the Japanese thought would be a terrifically demoralizing blow to America. Luckily, our anti-submarine tactics had gone into effect, and this did not happen. But this one submarine did come by, and it opened fire, and there was panic that immediately went up and down the coast. And because of this sighting of the submarine, LA had very itchy trigger fingers. And a day and a night later was when this false alarm air raid took place. Somebody says they saw something. Now, nobody knows for sure to this day whether anything was up there or not. It certainly wasn't a Japanese plane. It may have been a stray weather balloon. It may have been nothing. It may have just been somebody got nervous and shot off their anti-aircraft gun, and herd poisoning took place. Somebody sounded an air raid alarm, and the city blacked out for 6 hours, and all these gun emplacements started firing up at the sky at nothing. So that was the main event that triggered our thinking about this. In 1943, there were the Zoot Suit riots in Los Angeles. The The Zoot Suit riots were, well, first of all, there were the Zoot Suiters were Mexican Americans who ran around these outrageous clothes. It was sort of their rebellious statement. It was maybe the gang look of the time. And the American servicemen resented it. They thought that these Zoot Suits looked really, really goofy, and that with a war on, nobody had any business parading around looking crazy like that. And obviously there was a huge element of racism involved as well. So the servicemen would go around picking fights with the Zoot Suiters. And the Herald Examiner, which was one of the Hearst papers, actually at the time it was the Examiner, they got on the side of the servicemen on this because they didn't like guys walking around these Zoot Suits either. And they would print in the newspaper when the next skirmish was going to take place. And finally these developed into riots because people would read that there was supposed to be a brawl happening at the corner of 7th and San Pedro Street, and then all these servicemen would show up and all these Zoot Suiters would show up and they would make it happen, and they'd have a brawl and it turned into a riot, and police went out, and we thought that was a pretty interesting thing to have happen, and so we wrote a riot into the movie. Truth is stranger than fiction, and we discovered a lot of really, really interesting things in researching the movie. One of them was that on the roof of the Lockheed plant in Burbank, they actually built a quarter-size or sixth-size town. They built fake city streets with little buildings on it so that anybody flying over the plant looking down, it would look like there was a street there. It was not a plant, it was a street. So we came across this and said, oh, what a great setting for a scene. And we wrote this scene where Stilwell was on a tour of all the defense establishments in Los Angeles and went to the Lockheed plant to see how they were going to protect themselves in case of an attack. And there was a guy from Lockheed giving him a tour of Tiny Town on the roof. It would have been a great scene, but it was too expensive to do, so we didn't do it. Another interesting thing that we found was that in Life magazine, about a week or two after the war broke out, there actually was a pictorial showing how to tell the difference between the Japanese and the Chinese. The Chinese were our allies, the Japanese were our enemies. So they actually had these like racial charts showing that the average Chinese person was taller than the Japanese, and it was very, very racist and very, very weird, but it was also very funny in a twisted way, and we tried to do a version of that scene in the script as well, but Steven, rightly so, said, you guys are going too far with this. There's no way I can shoot that scene.
Mr. Ward Herbert Douglas, 1313 Pelican Way?
Yes.
Uh-huh. The Coast Artillery Command has determined your property to be strategically advantageous for the installation of an enemy aircraft defense battery.
What?
Another historical event that we came across that we used in the movie was that there was a guy in Maine who got an anti-aircraft gun put in his backyard. And we said, hey, this is cool. Let's transpose this to the West Coast. And ta-da, we have the story of Ward Douglas getting an anti-aircraft emplacement in his front yard.
Now I got him!
Ward Douglas, don't you dare fire that gun in this house!
The history of 1941 at MGM is real interesting. First of all, Herb Jaffe, who produced The Wind and the Lion for Milius, was also involved in Milius's deal. So he was involved at the beginning as a producer. And we wrote 2 drafts of the script for MGM and brought it to Dan Melnick, who was head of MGM at the time. And Melnick just didn't get the script. He didn't understand it, and he particularly was not happy with the word Japs in the title. Herb Jaffe, who had been in World War II in the Pacific Theater, got very gruff, and he said, I was in that war, Dan, and nobody ever called them Japanese. Anyway, Melnick passed on the project at MGM, and it so happened that Milius was very good friends with Steven Spielberg. They go out skeet shooting once a week together, and Milius was telling Steven about these two crazy guys that he met who come out of SC Film School and wrote this absolutely insane script about this LA air raid that had a tank battle in it and had a submarine and all kinds of insanity.
The first time I heard about 1941, it was called The Night the Japs Attacked. And I heard it during an afternoon when I was skeet shooting with my friend John Milius and our then two protégés, Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale. And the two Bobs had come up with this crazy screenplay that they had written. They told me about it. And I think what got me to want to read the script was they described at one point a scene where the Japanese, I think they're attacking an important strategic target, but in fact have targeted Pacific Ocean amusement park and blow the Ferris wheel, which rolls down the pier and into the water. And I remember getting the script and immediately turning to that page and noticing the way Bob and Bob write. Bob and Bob write by emphasizing things by putting exclamation points, underlining in capital letters. So the first line would be something like, the Japanese put their deck gun and aim their deck gun, at the Ferris wheel, and they have one exclamation point, all lowercase, and then it would say, they fire the gun. The word fire is capitalized, and there's two exclamation points, and then the shell hits the Ferris wheel, and that half that's capitalized, and there's three exclamation points, and of course the Ferris wheel rolls all the way down the pier and into the Pacific Ocean, is all in caps, all underlined with maybe a zillion exclamation points. I just remember, if that isn't the exact script, that was the impression I got from reading that section of the script, that these guys really had a passion to see this movie made by their use of punctuation and grammar and capital letters. And I thought, well, anybody that passionate about something, it's worth the read. So I sat down and read the entire script. And I must say that there's a part of me in my nice conservative life that is probably as crazy and insane as Milius and the two guys that wrote that script, that really got me attracted to the project. So it wasn't like I thought it would be an interesting science experiment to do 1941, but I really thought it would be a great opportunity to break a lot of furniture and see a lot of glass shattering. And it was basically written and directed as one would perform in a demolition derby.
And he said to John, I want to direct this movie, John. The only thing is, I'm about to start making this movie about UFOs at Columbia, but when I get finished with it, I'd love to make this movie. So John said, great, okay, let's set it up. And irony of ironies, the guy that ended up running Columbia at the time that it was going to get set up at Columbia was Dan Melnick, who had passed on the script at MGM. And of course, Steven Spielberg was a much more bankable name than John Milius was, and Melnick just kind of shrugged his shoulders and he said, well, I passed on the script at MGM, but gee, if Milius and Spielberg say this is a really good project, I guess it must be. Okay. Universal got involved because Steven had a deal with Universal, and here he had made Jaws for Universal. He went off and made Close Encounters for Columbia, and Sid Sheinberg at Universal was kind of giving Steven a little bit of a hard time, saying, Steven, you got to make another movie for me. You got to make another movie for me. And the budget on 1941 was huge. So Steven said, I got an idea. Why don't we make this a co-production between Columbia and Universal? And they flipped a coin to decide who got domestic distribution. Universal won that one, and Columbia got foreign distribution. But Columbia was the studio that won the right or lost the right in terms of overseeing the production. So we dealt with Columbia executives in the actual making of the picture, but it was Universal's marketing and distribution department that handled domestic release.
I've never had a career plan where I've planned my next 3 movies. It was just something that came at me, and I knew that John was interested in directing it, but then Big Wednesday came along, which was truly his personal passion and his pleasure to do a surfing movie, and which made the script available. And then John said, "Why don't you direct this?" And I had read it already because the two Bobs were sort of, interning with myself and with John over the years. And I read it and I said, well, I'm not doing anything at the moment. And I really made a decision like that. It was not like, gee, this is going to be good or bad for my career. I'd literally committed to direct the movie based on I wasn't doing anything better at the time. So I said, sure, why not? This is a free year, and I don't have any great passion gnawing at me. My great passion had been Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and that was actually winding up at the time because I was right in the middle of pre-production on Close Encounters when I read 1941. But I had nothing after that, and I thought, gee, what an interesting, story. Not even so much a story, what an interesting opportunity to, as I said before, break a lot of stuff. So I committed to it, and then Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale came to Mobile, Alabama several times while I was shooting this other humongously difficult production, and we were talking about California in 1941, and we were trading ideas and doing the rewrite while I was actually shooting a film that up to that point had been the most personal filmmaking experience of my career.
And the thing that's interesting about it is that the screenplay fell into the hands of the only person on Earth at the time who could have even attempted to think about making a movie that was on this scale. So the planets were all sort of lining up pretty well there. And then Bob and I went down to Alabama and worked with Steven on the screenplay for, I think, over a month or something while he was doing Close Encounters down there.
He set us up in an office in an airplane hangar where he was shooting the mothership stuff, and we'd be up there coming up with new ideas and writing new scenes, and then every once in a while run down and watch Steven shoot some. And then at night we'd go over to Steven's house. He'd run in this house, and we'd kick around. He'd read the new scenes. We'd kick around some ideas. We'd revise what we'd written, and we did that for 5 weeks, and it was great.
We all lived together in one house. And the two Bobs were there, Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale. They lived there too, because while we were editing Close Encounters, we were editing right there in the den. Had the editing room there. The two Bobs would be hanging out, and they'd be watching, and it was just a lot of fun. They'd be joking around. They're very comfortable to be with, two Bobs. So there was always a lot of laughs, and it was always very comfortable. They were writing this crazy script. We didn't know if it would ever get done, but it got done. And it was just a delightful experience. I guess they just got out of college or something. Steve found them, and it was a lot of fun. And while we were editing, they were writing. During the day, Steve would be out shooting, I'd be editing, and they'd be writing in the other room.
Bob and I write everything together in longhand. I mean, we actually sit in the room together and we act and talk out every scene, and then it's written in longhand. And then Bob, once we finally work out the scene, and we just write a sketch of the action and dialogue, and then Bob takes that information in his notes and he goes and writes it in the typewriter, and then from there we start to just again together. We start to edit everything that we write and then constantly keep revising it. But it's never a situation where one guy goes off and writes a scene and another guy writes another scene, and it's all done together. The
way to collaborate with them was to just turn them loose. There was no collaboration. I mean, Steven and I would put in our ideas, and they'd go off and just, go nuts. Now, it was always said that we all had so much energy, and we'd all start screaming together. We'd all start not screaming at each other angry, but screaming, yeah, what about this, and what about this, and all this kind of stuff. And they said there was always a thing at the time that my secretary is now Bob Zemeckis' wife, and she was the one who coined that. She said that if we put four of you in a room together, we exceed critical mass, and something terrible is going to happen. The room will explode.
It was the opposite of a disciplined type of collaboration. It was an outrageous collaboration, and we were just sort of topping each other with how we could just put more outrageous spin on every incident that we wrote. And of course, Bob and my mission was every time Steven would get an idea, no matter how outrageous it was, we worked very diligently and spent hours and days to try and figure out a way to actually fit it into the structure of the story. So it basically just kept accumulating. We just kept, that's why I call it the kitchen sink. We just kept throwing everything into the screenplay, including the kitchen sink, until it just became this mountain of gags.
One of the script writing habits that Bob and I picked up from John Milius was to put some kind of a quotation on the title page of the script, right after the title page of the script. And I don't actually remember what the original quote that we had was on the first two drafts of the script, but we got more into writing it and rewriting it and rewriting it as we got closer into production, and the production guys were figuring out how much this movie was going to cost, and Steven started to get terrified about how high the budget was going. One day in a production meeting, he said flat out, he said, "I will not make this movie cost a penny over $11 million. Well, by the time we were writing our 8th or 9th draft, and we were tired of whatever quote we had originally put in the script, we decided to put Steven's quote on there because the movie was about to go into production, and I think the budget was at this point already quite a bit higher than $11 million. And you know, our sixth sense of humor, we just had to do that. The character of Wally, who in the movies played by Bobby DeCicco, was always going to be the unifying character. It was sort of his story touched everybody else's story, the quest of this one character. And some of that, I think, got lost in how the movie finally ended up being edited, but in the expanded version that is on this disc, I think you'll be able to see how his story did and was the main focal point that just cut through everybody else's story. In the original draft, we first actually even met General Stilwell through Wally, because Wally and Dennis went to this department store. They create this false alarm air raid so that as a diversion, so that Wally can steal the zoot suit. He doesn't have enough money to get a zoot suit, and he wants to have a zoot suit because he's going to look much better in a zoot suit to win the jitterbug contest. There was another scene that was in originally that actually this was one that Steven thought of, where we were going to meet Wally practicing his dance steps by mimicking Fred Astaire behind the screen of a movie theater. And so there would be this giant Fred Astaire and this little Wally, and Wally would be doing the same dance numbers as Fred Astaire. It'd be a great visual image. And the usher came and caught him and threw him out of the theater, and they broke through the screen. And for some absurd reason, we thought it would be funny if there was some Joey Brown short on the screen as well, and they could run out of Joey Brown's wide open mouth. One of the ideas that John Milius had about what should happen in the story was that there should be a character who lost her virginity during the air raid. So we had devised this sequence where Betty ended up losing her virginity to Sitarsky under a truck while the air raid was going on, because with the air raid going on, he was handing her these lines. Those are the Japs, they're bombing us, we're all going to die. You don't want to die without ever having experienced the best thing life has to offer. And he seduced her while the air raid was going on. And in fact, while this was going on, Wally commandeers the tank, and the tank is rumbling, and she's just yelling, "I feel the earth moving, I feel the earth moving." Steven decided, I think, that was going a little bit too far, so we toned it down.
I got to be a real producer. I got to go make deals for the actors, and it was really fun going to the agents and buying the actors. And I had this wonderful technique. I'd offer, say, a 10% increase on the actor as to what they'd got, and I'd gotten before, and I'd say, you have until 4:30 to accept the deal. And then at 5 o'clock, I'm cutting it $5,000. At 6 o'clock, $5,000 more. And of course, they never want to get back to you, and they'd usually get back to me the next afternoon. I'd say, well, let me see, we're down to such and such by now, And I made all these agents cry. I loved it. It was terrific,
My name's Wild Bill Kelso, and don't you forget it.
Wild Bill Kelso was actually a relatively minor character in the original drafts of the script. And he became a bigger character when John Belushi was cast to play him.
It was our intention that this character just came in at the end of the movie to add insult to injury. But then I completely understand that when someone like John Belushi gets cast, then he was a big star then, and he was added into more of the movie and became brought into the film earlier on.
Steven decided that he should put more of John Belushi in the movie and did a couple of extra scenes where he got lost over the Grand Canyon and tried to open up Coca-Cola or the tomato soup or whatever it was, on all kinds of gags in his airplane.
Start.
You never knew what he was going to do. You never knew if he would stay with the script or make up his own dialogue, or he was going to turn to the left with a funny-looking extra that appealed to John's sense of humor that he might want to fold into the scene or not. You didn't know what John was going to do. And the moment where John was trying to get back on the airplane, and he got back on the wing of the plane, and he turned, and then there was a lot of morning dew on the wing, and his foot slipped, and he took a real header head first. Luckily, his fall was broken, but unfortunately, it was broken by a human being who happened to be standing there and reached up and actually half caught John and half allowed John to land on him. And if you step down your version, you'll see the fall John took was a pretty serious fall, but John didn't get hurt. It didn't even faze him, and fortunately, the actor he fell on was not hurt. So, and it was a very natural fall, so I kept it in the movie. Working with John Belushi was in itself a motion picture experience. I mean, that's a whole other story. We would need a whole other laser disc to talk about that, because that was a whole other experience. I really loved John Belushi and had a great time working with him. And he was great to me and my family, and we got along great, and he's just an amazing talent. He's still missed today.
We went to watch the blind sword. What is it? Nothing really great, huh? I mean, I just saw her hot. Well, what do you know? That's so hot, huh? It's probably not bad. I heard you. Which one? In the car? Yeah. It was either real funny or real embarrassing. One of the two. Something. It was. I don't know. It was weird. So I'm trying to. There it goes. You're right. Like magazine photographers that went to UCLA, and I'll prove it to you, Johnny. Kubrick, Coppola, all of them. Nothing about making movies. Not movies. Hey, more. Looks like the honeymoon is over.
Madness. It's the only word to describe it. This isn't the state of California. This is a state of insanity.
My first choice for General Stilwell was Charlton Heston. But my real first choice for Stilwell was John Wayne. And John Wayne and I had met at Joan Crawford's memorial service at the Academy. And we were sitting on a dais, and because my first professional job was directing Joan Crawford in a television pilot, Night Gallery, they thought it was appropriate to get the new generation to her memorial service, and I was very happy because I liked Joan. I liked my experience working with her on my first show. And of course, John Wayne was there, and John Wayne kept looking over at me like this, because I was, at the time, I think I was in my 20s. I must look like I was in my teens, and Wayne made a bunch of cracks about who is this guy sitting here talking about Joan Crawford. He looks like, my great nephew. And he made a lot of jokes about me at the time, and so we were able to meet backstage after it was over, and he came over to me and said, "Look, I hope you had a sense of humor, because I wasn't trying to hurt your feelings. I just, had to say those things. I couldn't help myself." And I said, "No, it was just great to meet you. If you had knocked me across the room, I would have still been happy to have made contact with you." And we were talking about John Ford, and we became kind of like telephone friends for not very long. We talked on the phone, once a month, and I'd call him about ideas I had about movies, and I tried to get him to talk about some of his past works. And at one point, he even sent me a script that I think he had co-written that he wanted to do with Maureen O'Hara about a camel race in Morocco. It was an interesting script. 1941 came into my life about that same era, and I said, I have a chance to direct this movie called 1941, and I would love to send you the script to see if you would consider playing General Stilwell. Well, he knew all about General Stilwell. He went on and on about what a great general he was. And so with great enthusiasm, he said, please send me the screenplay. So I sent him the script, and I must say he read it, I think, that day, because he called me the next day on the phone. And he was outraged. He thought it was the most anti-American piece of drivel he had ever read in his life. And he said, I'm so surprised at you. I mean, I thought you were an American. I thought you were going to make a movie to honor the memory of World War II. But this dishonors the memory of what happened. It's not even accurate. He says, I was around when those fake bombs fell out of the sky, and there was no panic in Los Angeles. There were some news reports on the radio, and that was about it. And he said, and then he just tried to talk me out of making the movie. He said, you should never make this movie. Don't even make this film. He said, I'll be very disappointed in you if you wind up making this picture, because this is not this is really sort of an anti-American film. I never saw it as an anti-American film, but he took great exception with that. We stayed friends. We stayed on the phone, and we just went on to other topics. Never mentioned that movie again. But the next choice was to go to Charlton Heston, who I believe also felt that the film was a bit of a slap in the face of America, or a pie in the face of America. And that's how I used to always think of 41. It was like a pie fight from the old silent movie era. And what's wrong about sticking a pie in the face of the Statue of Liberty from time to time, if it's in the spirit of humor? But I don't think Chuck Heston thought it was in that spirit as well. I didn't talk to Heston. Milius did, because he had the relationship with Chuck, and John just reported that Chuck had said no in no uncertain terms. And, of course, our next choice was Robert Stack, who probably turned out to be the greatest General Stilwell of any of the aforementioned actors, because he looks a lot like Stilwell, especially with the haircut and the glasses. He was a spitting image of Stilwell. And as he proved later in a very funny movie called Airplane, Bob Stack, when playing straight but with funny material around him, is a wonderful humorist. He's such a fine actor anyway, Robert Stack, but he really knew how to handle the comedy, I think, in 1941. So I was so happy to have him in the film.
Dumbo. Sure did get to get my mind off things for a while.
And Stilwell actually did see Dumbo while he was in L.A. during December of 1941. So that's an actual true fact that he saw Dumbo. And we use that, obviously, in the movie.
Toshirô was acting like a drill instructor in the Marine Corps. He was a lot of these extras were, were just people who weren't extras. They were hired because they were Japanese, and they probably never been on a ship before in their lives. Even though they were on a fake ship sitting in a tank on stage 27 at MGM, they had to look and perform like sailors. And Mifune did not like the way they were undisciplined, so he asked me for permission to take over the direction of all the Japanese extras in the film, and I gave him permission.
And they were all kind of wise asses, and they were out in the parking lot. And the first time he got him out there, he went up to him and he got him standing up, and they were sitting there. And the first one he went up to, and he said, "This is the way that the Japanese officers drill their men." And he went up to the first one, and he was, and the guy came to attention. The rest of them came to attention, and from that day on, they were his. By the end of the movie, they would have all died in a banzai charge for Toshirô Mifune. He was their emperor.
Bring on your tough horses, you never had one that would set me to yes and no.
The original concept of the Japanese was that they would always stay on their sub. They never would leave their sub. Well, Steven and John got this idea about seeing the Japanese come into a hot dog stand and cut up hot dogs like sushi. And Steven also wanted to do his version of the old Three Stooges gag where the Stooges were dressed up as Christmas trees and go wandering around and are hiding out. And it was kind of a funny scene. And there was this farmer who happened into the place where the Japanese were cutting up these hot dogs, got scared and ran off, and that was the extent of his part. Well, Steven cast Slim Pickens to play this part, who essentially had no dialogue. And a week or so later, he was bemoaning the fact that here he had cast the world's greatest character actor, Slim Pickens, and there wasn't anything for him to do. He didn't have much of a part. And maybe Bob and I could figure out a way to expand this character so that it would be a part worthy of Slim Pickens.
Everything Stanley Kubrick has ever directed has been a personal inspiration for me. I wanted Slim Pickens in the movie so I could do the parody from Dr. Strangelove when Slim Pickens is going through the survival kit checklist. And, of course, he goes through the Cracker Jack box, and he also goes through the checklist of all the items that they're taking from his pockets. And it was a bit of both a send-up and an homage to those moments in Dr. Strangelove.
It was actually Brian De Palma who suggested that his name be Hollis Wood and do a sort of who's on first routine because the Japanese are looking for Hollywood, and Holly is short for Hollis, and everybody would call Hollis Hollywood, so they're asking him, where's Hollywood? And he's going, I'm right here, I'm right here.
Where Hollywood? Right here.
What?
You're looking at him.
Who?
Hollis Wood.
Where?
I'm right here. Shoot, can't you understand plain English?
Hollywood?
Huh?
Where?
Here.
Ironically, turned out to be a lot funnier than the original scene that Slim Pickens got cast to do, which was just this one thing with him running away from this little shack. So the trees sequence ended up not being in the released version of the movie, and all this other stuff did.
Hey, this grapefruit's rotten. I'm gonna throw it away. Is it all right with you if I throw it away? All right, I'm gonna throw it away. Here it goes. It's going, it's going, it's going, it's going, going, it's going, it's going. Wait,
Now, the interesting story about the two guys on the Ferris wheel.
Now, don't say another word.
We envision Jackie Gleason and Art Carney playing them and sort of doing a Ralph Cramden, Ed Norton routine on the Ferris wheel. And we actually describe the characters as one of them looks like a bus driver and the other one looks as if he might work in a sewer. And we wrote this great routine for him to do. And then we found out that they absolutely refused to work together. Jackie Gleason was contacted by Sally Dennison, the casting director, and he said, I'm sorry, I just will not work with Art Carney, which was really kind of sad. Subsequent to when we had written those scenes, Bob and I made the movie I Want to Hold Your Hand, and we discovered Eddie Deezen. And Steven loved Eddie Deezen, as do we. And so we wrote the part for Eddie Deezen.
Oh, boy, my favorite. A bologna and clam sandwich smothered in garlic. You want some? What's the matter, pal? You got an upset stomach? Why, I got just the thing right here for a stomach ache.
What is it?
Buttermilk.
No, thank you.
Yeah, well, if he's not going to drink it, give it to me. My stomach's upset, too.
Oh, you want some? All right, here it is. He says he wants more. Oh, lockjaw again, huh?
Hey, kind of hard on the little fella, aren't you?
And when Murray Hamilton finally met Eddie Deezen, Murray went up to Steven and he said, Steven, I'm not going to have any trouble playing this part. I hate that little bastard.
No. Hi, I'm Eddie Deezen. Hi.
This experience was a no-holds-barred, sort of free-for-all, where anything goes. It's like that great song, Anything Goes, that we wound up using in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. I've always loved that song, and that was my theory in philosophy when I made in 1941, that anything should go, which meant that if we wanted to put our friends in the movie, wanted to put our parents in the movie, it was okay. So it was a good opportunity to, Penny Marshall, was and still is a very close friend of mine, and so she agreed to do a day.
What's your real name, Sal?
Raoul.
I knew it.
Lipschitz.
And Lenny and Squiggy from Laverne and Shirley did a small cameo.
You hear that?
Yeah.
Milius ran through it as a crazed Santa Claus firing a gun into the air.
This is the kind of movie that if you worked on it, you were going to be in it sooner or later, because it just sprawled all over everything. You couldn't help but get it on you, So I don't remember how that happened. I think that I showed up on the set, and Steven was always having me write things on the spot, because he always maintained that I wrote my best things right there, leaning over the hood of a car or something like that. So he'd say, do a scene like this, or do a scene. I think this was one of those scenes where he says, do a scene where Santa Claus comes up and shoots out the lights. And so I wrote the scene or whatever, and he says, now you be Santa Claus. And they outfitted me and gave me a pistol, and it seemed like a good idea at the time,
John used to do something at night in front of the car headlights. He would do a great Bigfoot being caught in car headlights impersonation that only Milius can do. So I dressed John up as Santa Claus. I said, by the way, do your Bigfoot impersonation as you see General Stilwell and you become so stunned, like being caught in the headlights of a car. You're caught basically under the gaze of the General Stilwell, and do your Bigfoot thing, which he did. It was hysterical, but it was so inside. Only I knew it was funny, and only Bob and Bob knew it was funny, that it was the kind of thing that it was better, left out of the movie. It was too much of an inside gag.
Lights out! Lights out!
We won't need the Japs.
Throughout the entire production, I kept saying, we're missing Fred McMurray. The one ingredient in 40 we're missing is Fred McMurray. Later, I wound up saying, we're also missing a lot of humor. We should make this comedy funnier. But that never.
This is the board for the night the Japs attacked Los Angeles. And I missed a shot. Take two. I'm showing this. This is a sacrifice to the writers. It was such a ridiculously long schedule.
Here, we got the new thing. Remember the Jaws thing?
Once that movie started, there was very little you could do except sit back and watch. It just got, it's like a snowball that was out of control, and it rolled down the hill and then finally stopped, But I came to the set every day and would, listen to Steven's latest ideas of, like driving a tank through a paint factory and a turpentine factory or something like this, and said, do you really need to do this, And
I really didn't know what I was doing on this movie. I got to tell you, I think one of the reasons the film came out, so chaotic is I really didn't have a vision for 1941. And if Bob Zemeckis was a director, I'm convinced that Bob would have done a much better job than me had he been an accomplished director in 1978, because that was really the kind of film that the author should have stepped forward and directed.
Mine and Bob's our first intention when we wrote the early drafts of the screenplay was that it was supposed to be a very black comedy. And it was very, very dark and very cynical. And a lot of that was tempered by Steven, and then a lot of the cast that came in. So the film shifted from this very dark satire to more of a screwball comedy.
All right, this is a new rule. This is the last couple days of June 1978, and I am on my way into the office of A-Team at the hangar in Burbank, where we are preparing 1941, to see how large the budget has gotten over. I guess the one funny idea that I had, independent of any of the source material, was I thought it'd be really funny to start the film with a takeoff on Jaws. And I ideally wanted to use the same girl, Susan Bacalini, who we used in Jaws, swimming out and doing a little bit of the balletics, the water ballet. And then all of a sudden bubbles form, and as opposed to being ripped apart by a shark, she is skewered by a periscope, and as the entire eye boat rises under her, she winds up 50 feet in the air. Only real aficionados of duel would understand what I was trying to do with 1941.
Oh, no!
In 1941, we used the same gas station where Dennis Weaver goes to make a phone call, and the truck attacks him in the snake farm. And knocks all the snake cages over, and the rattlesnake snaps at him, and he gets the tarantula on his leg. Not only did I use the same gas station, but I used Lucille Benson, who was the actress, who was the owner of the snake farm, and then I wanted her to be the owner of the gas station.
Fill her up. That's it.
One of the things I tried for, I got this idea for a sight gag, where I wanted von Kleinschmidt, played by Christopher Lee, in trying to threaten Slim Pickens while he's sitting on the can to work a little faster and returning the stuff he had internally taken. That I wanted him to take this device out of a bag. It's like a lethal weapon. It's like a dowel and some chain, another 2 dowels and a big hook. And Slim Pickens is going to confess his soul and his life when he sees this thing. And it turns out to be a coat hanger, and they put von Kleinschmidt's coat on the hanger and carry it to another room. And I shot it, but when I previewed the film in Dallas, nobody laughed. It wasn't funny.
If problems with your digestion you have, ways of relief we can give to you.
I was determined to get this gag to work in one of these movies, and I had this bet with myself. I would try this gag out in my next 10 films, and I would stop when it was got a laugh. And fortunately, when Tote comes out in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he takes the torture device and turns it into a coat hanger, it got a big laugh, and I was. One of the things that confused myself as a filmmaker in my approach to directing 1941 is, in the back of my mind, I always saw 1941 as an old-fashioned Hollywood musical, and had fantasized with John Williams about doing 8 musical song and dance numbers, all based on big band music. Tommy Dorsey, Benny Goodman, and that sort of feel of the big band era. Couldn't we make a big band era musical in 1978 for 79 release? And John was enthusiastic about this. I had this big dance number I wanted to do by the Hollywood sign, Hollywood land sign in those days. And I had other areas in the film that I thought we could cut out 20 lines of dialogue and instead replace those ideas and that narrative with a musical narrative. So like in a traditional musical, every song has to advance the story. You can't stop just to sing and dance. You have to stop to tell story inside song. And I thought, what a great opportunity to make the first musical of the old Hollywood tradition in a couple of decades. But I didn't have the courage of my convictions, or even the courage of my innermost dreams to pre-record, and John would write the music and we'd bring a lyricist in, and I just didn't have the courage at that time in my life to tackle a musical. So inside 1941, we have the dance sequence, the jitterbug sequence, which is sort of a fragment of what I wanted to do in an 8-song version. And in a sense, I always regret not having made 1941 into a complete old-fashioned golden era Hollywood musical. I think the most satisfying experience for me in making 1941 was shooting the Jitterbug contest, which Tom DeRolf choreographed for me.
In the case of 1941, music preparation, I think, began a little bit earlier than usual because of the canteen sequence especially, which had the fight in it and also kind of ballet, a sort of dance, if you like. And this cantina scene, I think we actually rehearsed the scene to the music of Benny Goodman's Sing, 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 which is wonderful. I don't know how many people remember that, but Sing, Sing, Sing dates from 1938, when Benny Goodman did the first jazz concert at Carnegie Hall in New York City. And he presented his swing orchestra in Carnegie Hall, and there was a great uproar in the press that the world of music was contaminated by jazz, that he had the temerity to bring jazz into Carnegie Hall, this sacred temple of art. And it was the finale of Goodman's concert, and it tore the house apart. And it was a very famous thing in American popular music, a very famous event and a very famous piece. Everybody beyond a certain age knows the story and knows the music. And so when Steven was constructing this canteen sequence, which has a fight in it, Donnybrook fight in there, we thought we would perhaps maybe create some new music, or perhaps not. Maybe we should use Benny Goodman's Sing, Sing, Sing. So a certain amount of rehearsal for the dance section and the fight section was done to this Benny Goodman music. And the film was then edited after it was shot. And for whatever reasons, we decided not to use the Goodman music, but that I would attempt to write a kind of parody of this that might even be recognized by those who would do it. I mean, would remember the Goodman piece, because obviously we were doing a send-up of this Sing, Sing, Sing thing. And I called my piece Swing, Swing, Swing. A little play on word thing there with that. And the nice thing about doing an original piece was we didn't have to distort Benny Goodman's music so much out of shape in order to accommodate these choreographic gestures of a punch as a brass chord and somebody slipping and falling as some other gesture in the woodwinds and so on. So the genesis of that thing really started with pre-photography rehearsals with the Goodman music. And I may even also myself have written some and recorded some music before the film was shot in that sequence.
This is the sequence shot at the USO, and it's not in the picture where Bobby Cicco dances on top of the table, and we actually believe that it's Bobby doing all the dancing all the time. Bobby was a good dancer, but I don't know if he was quite the tap dancer that Steven wanted.
We did a switch. We thought that Tom's dancing, his just tapping, was so good. How could we start on Tom's feet and let him do some real Fred Astaire hoofing, dolly down this banquet table on his feet, and then somehow wind up without a cut with Bobby DeCicco landing into the medium shot. And the one way we did it was we lowered a kind of trapeze bar from the ceiling. So Tom just had to lift himself up, and then Bobby had to lower himself down, so there would be a nice blend between the feet making a jump. So Tom's feet jumped and Bobby's feet landed.
The Luma crane, and it's I think it's one of its inventors, Jean-Marie Lavalou, became an extremely useful tool for us in 1941. We talked about it and thought about it. It was in France, and we'd have to bring it over from France to Hollywood. And we talked about it, and we felt that it would help us implement what we wanted to do with the miniatures. That was the beginning of the thought process, I believe, to bring the Luma. Also, it became very inviting looking at the reel that we had seen about what the Luma could do, is going from exterior in through a window into another room, come back again and come outside. It gave us a lot of latitude to do what we want to do, working with airplanes and moving from the ground up to the cockpit and so forth. We had a dance sequence at the USO that I think one shot lasted 7 minutes. And we used the Luma, did the 360 with the Luma. It allowed us a lot of variations that you normally can't do with a standing camera. It had a camera at the end of a boom, which you could control 50 feet away with the operating wheels and so forth, and you could move that camera any way you wanted to. You were unlimited in what you could do with it. But the first day's dailies sold everybody. We couldn't believe that we had achieved something that we thought we might have problems with. And so from that point on, we were all sucked in and we all loved the Luma. And the Luma became primary camera. It became the A camera on the
Everything's gonna work.
Hey, Terry, this is your big chance.
Hey, is this sound?
That's right.
Hey, how are you? It's really good to be back. This is the set of 1941. We're going to blow up this marquee over here. Just wait and watch.
Okay.
Tree Williams. One of the stars. Okay, Bobby Cicco.
Come on, gang. Places, please. Let's go. Come on.
We're gonna get him, man. We're gonna get him. We're gonna blow him sky high.
1, 2, 3. Grown men. Grown men.
Oh, my God.
Hello, John.
This is Candid Camera. Wait a minute.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Good. Hello, Walter.
Watch that sideline. You gotta be on the music box side of that coffee.
Don't catch yourself on fire, Sammy. That's okay.
All right, well, let's get it together.
Smile.
Flint. Hey, production value. Hey, Frank.
Hello, Steven.
How are you?
How are you?
What are you doing up there?
Sleeping? Dead tired.
Dead tired, huh?
Yeah.
I don't blame you. You've been working hard.
Not really.
I'm on that already.
Go. Any more gun volunteers? Let's light them up.
Quick, Bob, say something obscene.
Hi, Steve. Hi, Bob. Let's touch lunges.
It doesn't even have a reflex viewer.
Doesn't even have a reflex over the shoulder.
It's just here, right here. And we need the help. You can't go like this.
Right.
You're out of picture.
I'm gonna beat him.
It's you have to stay in close.
From the kick.
Well, you see where?
But keep my hand here for the kick.
Yeah, it's beauty. Then we see it scoot underneath you. Okay. It's a marvel.
This side of the loop. Hello.
How you doing, AD?
All right, how are you?
How do you like this show, AD? Say a few words.
Okay, fellas, this will be picture. Please get ready. Tommy gun should be ready.
Is it too much? Good.
And roll, please.
95, 6, 3. Okay, here we go.
Everybody ready? Everybody set?
That's enough,
Where's the slammer I was told about?
Right. Just like every day,
yes,
right?
Really.
Now, that last take, Treat did it last time, you see? Look at that blood, folks. Tony. That's real blood.
Here.
About a week.
Oh, I love it.
Just about a week is all.
All right, everybody go back and we'll come back in a week.
Dee, are you done, Aiden?
To work.
Did you get it? Did you get it? Yeah, cut.
We've got about 10% less of this stuff showing out, but then we added some.
It was so great being able to make a movie with 80 flowers.
You got that big burst over the Hollywood stage that comes down.
He's just one of the most revered and talented special effects artists in the world.
To create the effect of a full-size plane rolling over, we did use a technique that I'd worked on years ago at MGM when we built a set in a huge circle. I believe it was like nearly 20 feet in diameter that we could rotate. And with the camera sitting still, then the whole set rotated. And we used the same principle to rotate the airplane as we did the set for Fred Astaire. Now that takes care of the full-size plane, but then we also made we call it a guillotine, to make a miniature plane roll.
We put miniature airplanes, on wires. AD invented the system that could actually spin the wires, all three of them from both sides, with maybe 100 feet or 200 feet in between stanchions. AD invented this kind of Lazy Susan up on its side that would turn the airplane in making numerous flips and rolls.
I also got a scientific award for developing this that would rotate the plane 360 degrees. We have had planes many times before that would go straight through, up and down, but we'd never put it so that it would go up and down and rotate at the same speed. So it was something that we were proud of, that we developed for this particular picture. The crash landing on Hollywood Boulevard was flying a full-size plane on a free flight through the air, which I had never done before, and whether it had been, I don't know. But we had to build a ramp 150, 200 feet long to put the plane on it. We took a block and tackle and put it in reverse and had a truck pull it through.
I think we had 7 or 9 cameras. We had several cameras, all different sizes, all different areas, all different, to carry it sideways, to bring it to you, to catch the launch away from us, shooting away from us. And the first time it happened, it didn't launch itself correctly, so we had to do it again. We had to come back a couple of days later and do it again, a couple of nights later and do it again. And the second time was absolutely perfect. It just launched and skidded, and it was intercut with the other cameras that we had, which elongated that slide.
The P-40 has a takeoff speed of about 70 miles an hour. So we were very close to a takeoff speed of a P-40 whenever we came off of that.
AD contributed so much, and AD and the Frazee brothers, worked very, very closely together in 1941 to do all the physical effects, the explosive effects, the rigging of the tank running over the cars, the rigging of the entire house to fall into the ocean, the anti-aircraft gun going through all the walls. They were responsible for everything that is full size and physical. and they did brilliant work on that movie. And then I think he retired shortly thereafter, 1941. Suggested I retire with him. He said, "You're as worn out as I am. We should both retire."
Hey, D, we'd like to interview about that last shot.
We had a short in our switch, sir, and when he plugged it in, it went automatically.
That part.
I f***ed up. Will you do me a favor?
Yes, what is it?
Fire me.
No, I can't. You're too young.
I brought Chuck Jones, the famous director of animation, the inventor of the Coyote and Roadrunner, and the director of so many of the great Warner Brothers cartoons. And I met him and wanted to bring some of that Warner Brothers Looney Tune value to 1941. And Chuck came up with a great sequence about a runaway torpedo that goes through town with people actually falling on top of it and riding it for a few blocks and getting knocked off and it going under cars and threatening to hit something and blow up part of Los Angeles. And Chuck came up with something that was so wonderfully, so loony in its concept and so toony in its execution that it would have been perfect for animation, cell animation, but would have been, technically and logistically impossible to shoot with a movie camera with stunt people and real sets in a real world. Maybe today with CGI, computer digital technology, it would be much easier to make that sequence, come to life. But we couldn't do it with with the money I had in the budget in 1978.
They wanted us to build a torpedo that would come out of the water. This would be full size. Go up the beach, across the highway with asphalt, and explode at the other end. So we went to work and we built a torpedo. This was also on tracks. To create the asphalt, we used slabs of cork. And when the torpedo would hit the cork, it would crush it and throw it up in the air to make it look like it was actually asphalt.
But we put dirt underneath the cork so it'd kill the track. Yeah. And then whatever goes under here, I don't know, because that may be water but we'll still...
Water and asphalt.
Watch stepping on nails. Watch stepping on...
No, I didn't walk in.
Now, Mr. Spielberg says, now I want a motorcycle riding right directly in front of it and having the torpedo chase the motorcycle. Well, this was a practically impossible thing to do because the weight of a motorcycle would crush through the sand down into our tracks to where we had the torpedo. And he also wanted a truck to come across prior to that and just barely missed a motorcycle. And the truck would have crushed our track.
One of the first things we did as we set up at the Burbank airport for our miniature and physical effects facility was watch the effects guys build this, it might have been a 60, 80-foot track to hold a full-size torpedo, because one of the initial sequences, the submarine fires a torpedo that goes up on the boardwalk and breaks the planks and chases people around, which I don't believe ever got filmed. But they had built this full-size torpedo out of sonotube with a fiberglass head, and they put it on a track, and it was pulled by a shiv and pulley with a pickup truck. So when the pickup truck accelerated, the torpedo would go whizzing down the track, and when the pickup truck stopped, the torpedo theoretically should have stopped. But the day they were testing it, the torpedo got up to speed, and they went like, yeah, that's a good speed, and then they put the brakes on the truck. But the cable holding the torpedo didn't hold, and it went flying through the door of the metal door of the hangar into the parking lot. So it was like half out of the door, half into the parking lot, and between the two front wheels of two cars, missing each one by about a foot. I remember later on, Buzz Feichens and John Milius went outside and took poses of it like big game hunters.
I'm so proud of 1941 for another reason. I think 41 has the greatest miniatures since the Leyendecker days, since the old, Arnold Gillespie days of the great MGM miniatures from the 20s and 30s and 40s. And I think Greg Jean and his team of artisans and craftspeople and just, artists did the most amazing job recreating not only Pacific Ocean Park, but recreating Hollywood Boulevard with the Roosevelt Hotel and the Broadway and all the different buildings that were there in that era. They recreated on stage 16 at Warner Brothers, and Pacific Ocean Park was built, I think, on stage 30 at MGM Studios.
Hey! Initially, we only built one Ferris wheel, and Matt Sweeney and his crew had it on a marionette gimbal, where it was suspended by the hubs on an overhead track going over the pier itself. There was a cable that was dangling that hopefully you didn't see too much. That had to be wound around the Ferris wheel to give us power for the lights, and it just sort of kept going back and forth over the pier. What we had to rig on the pier, though, is since the Ferris wheel was about half-inch above the surface, we rigged two parallel troughs with like two nail blades in them, so as the wheel was going down the pier, on the first take, I was running along the side, pulling a shiv and pulley that was pulling these troughs, breaking up all the little splinters. We arrived at MGM about 5:30 in the morning and rigged the Ferris wheel, and we probably started to roll camera about 9 o'clock, and everything was going well. Hit the water and went down, and there was cheering and hollering, but there was like, Steven was standing there going like this, and I'm like, uh-oh, what's going on? So after a conference, he came up and says, well, guys, how soon can you re-rig this Ferris wheel, because I want the lights to stay on under the water when it goes on, and I want a bigger explosion when it hits the water. So we were going crazy for about 4 hours, and about 2 o'clock we had straightened out what damage was done to the Ferris wheel, because it initially hit a little ring of primer cord and some of the metal was bent. And then we laminated resin over all these light bulbs up. We had to restring on the whole thing. And about 2:30 we shot it again, and it worked the way he wanted. It hit the water, there was a bigger splash, and it stayed lit as it went down. If they wanted a third take, I don't think we could have done it.
We love the use of smoke in that picture, so I think we used it extensively. Smoke is not used for any kind of effect outside of when you use it for an effect, other than to create a texture, a feeling, an atmosphere visually, so that you set the mood of what you're doing in another area, only trying to suck the audience into what is happening. It helps you achieve a lot of the effects because it kind of diffuses the unreal part of what we're trying to make real.
We were concerned at some point that the smoke would be, because it was an oil smoke at that time, would drift and lay on top of the miniatures and create a sheen on the actual model that would give away the scale. So every now and then we had to go down and wipe everything off, wipe all the oil off. But nowadays they have a dry smoke that eliminates that problem completely. But in those days we had a rag crew out every morning just wiping everything down.
Miniature explosions is an effects man's nightmare because it's easy to create a large explosion, but to create an explosion that will match the scale of the miniatures is a lot more difficult.
In all the explosions, I ran a bunch of tests at 90 frames a second on putting primer cord inside of a balsa wood plywood structure and blowing it up. And it was, even at 90 frames a second, it was too fast and looked like a miniature. And I had this idea. which I don't think had ever been done before. And I said, how do we slow down an explosion? I want these explosions to be slower so we see more detail of the buildings blowing up. And I came up with this idea of using air mortars, that you would put the air mortar just below the stage floor and aimed only 4 or 5 inches away from the outer wall of the building you want to blow up. And then inside the air mortar, I put glitter, Christmas glitter, red and silver glitter, and little tiny pieces of balsa wood, which we call minutia, and mixed it all in there. And I thought we should put flash bulbs with different colors on the flash bulbs, orange, yellow, red, white flash bulbs, and trigger the flash bulbs at the moment the air mortar is exploding the walls out. So you had a backlit effect, so all the minutia would be backlit by these flashes. And then I could reduce my frame speed to about 45 frames a second instead of 60 or 90 frames a second, and all the explosions were done with air mortars. And I'm very proud of that because it really gave each explosion was much more detailed the way things blew up.
The large submarine miniature we made for 41 was crewed by Milius Roman, who was sort of an old world craftsman. And he made this thing, I think it was like 15 feet long. He did it with planks and spars, then we skinned it with foam and fiberglassed it, put ballast tanks in it. So it was actually sort of could have been a functioning little submarine. I think it wound up being used in Raiders of the Lost Ark later on. But the weirdest experience we had with it was in the tank, the Esther Williams tank at MGM, and somehow during the night, I think one of the studio people left the drain off the tank, and the tank wound up draining itself. The submarine was tethered to the side, and it just sort of, in the morning, it was like sort of twisted and broken. We had to like flood the tank again, fill it up, and do some emergency repairs to get it going. But it was like repairing a regular boat, just getting in there with fiberglass cloth and putting it all back together. A lot of things changed during the middle of production, like the scale of the miniatures. We started building them in one scale, a lot smaller, because we could get dollhouse material that was that size, and etc. And then they did some camera tests and found out that it'd be nicer if they went half a size bigger. So it's like we made molds and patterns for the tanks and the planes in this smaller scale, and then wound up never using them at all and going to a bigger scale. We used forced perspective to get the most out of the shot because we were shooting in such a wide format. We could see things past the main street. So rather than go to the expense of building very expensive miniatures all the way through and not having enough room, we actually just sort of forced the perspective just past the first row of buildings. As a matter of fact, we used like 4 dozen cardboard boxes with holes cut in them as light boxes with transparencies or little toy dolls behind them. I remember we called all these furniture shops and tried to get all their refrigerator cartons we can and brought them over to the stage. Some people thought we were junk collectors. When it was decided we had to go down lower in the street, we had to come up with all these little miniature details to make the street look actually alive and lived in, since there were actually no people on the street. So we added a lot of little things like fire hydrants and newspaper racks and vendor stands and mailboxes and a lot of cars just to add some life to this barren street. The cars we carved out of foam and vacuum formed. I must have done about 36 of these 1940 Fords. Then we went over to like the local Savons and cleaned them out of all the little Barbie cars for the right wheels and just sort of tacked them together and taped them together very quickly. Some of them we actually put little RC units in, but because of the interference with different radio signals, the cars would like swerve out of, hit buildings and do other stuff. So a more safe method was came up with, and we used just strings, guys behind the buildings, just pulling strings at cue. We'd yell like, car number 4, car number 5, car number 6. And then sometimes the camera cart, which was also very low on the ground shooting up, would react to this radio interference and just like cream the cars and cream half the buildings on the bottom and just crush a lot of stuff. But it was a pretty hit and miss thing half the time, but most of it worked out pretty good. A lot of people have brought up the fact that the buildings on Hollywood Boulevard aren't exactly where they're supposed to be. This was falls into the category of artistic license. The art department had built little maquettes and just said, well, let's do this because the plane looks better going by this thing on this side and going by this thing on the other side. but most of the people that hadn't been to Hollywood don't know. The San Fernando Valley set required us, well, we could have built anything, but we just decided to get drawings of what the actual streets were at the time, and we blew it up. And proportionally, we found out the houses were about that big. So we just went to the bandsaw and the table saw and just whacked out a whole bunch of houses that wound up being very much like Monopoly houses. And we had rubber stamps made with windows and doors on them, and we just painted them and stamped them on it, and we just had them all over the place. So, yeah, I think a lot of people took them home for Monopoly sets. I've been very fortunate in my working with Steven in that the first film I'd worked on, Close Encounters, I got an Oscar nomination with Doug Trumbull and all the other folks there. And then on 41, we were fortunate enough to get another Oscar nomination, myself with A.D. Flowers and Bill Fraker, and I'm just tickled pink about that.
When we wrote the first draft of the script, the ending of the movie was everybody going off to war. And Milius thought, gee, there should be a tag. We should find out what happened to Wally and Betty after the war was over. So we had one version where Wally came back from the war wanting to marry Betty, and she'd married somebody else. And then that was too sad, and we decided that he should come back and she would still be there, and they would get married and live happily ever after. And then we said, well, gee, that may be too sentimental. And then we went completely insane and came up with one where we actually had Wally and Dennis on board the B-17 that dropped the bomb over Hiroshima. And Wally said, you know, remember how those Japanese screwed up my chance to win that dance contest? Yeah, this is for you. He drops the bomb.
I don't think we even wrote that one. That was my favorite ending. It turned out that after that the movie flashed back and Wally was the bombardier in the Enola Gay. That was the ending I always wanted to put on the movie. But it was too outrageous for everyone. No one would listen to me.
So we decided that what ought to be is just not jump 5 years ahead of time and just finish the movie and end the movie the morning after all this insanity took place. So we were going to just have this big convoy leave the Douglas home where everything ended up to the tune of Goodbye Mama, I'm Off to Yokohama, which was a big propaganda song at the time, and kind of have everybody march out of the theater in a patriotic frenzy of some sort. In the earlier draft of the script, Stillwell actually went out to the La Brea tar pits because Kelso had said he shot down this Japanese plane, that's where it was. And of course, Stillwell finds Burkhead out there, and it's not a Japanese plane, and he's really pissed off. It's his own guy. And he says, Burkhead, there's a madman running around telling people that he shot down a Jap plane, and I believe him. So I want you to get a bucket of red paint. And you know what you're going to do with that red paint? No, sir. What, sir?
And Stillwell ordered, he ordered his men to paint the imperial, the Japanese symbol on the tail, the rising sun on the tail. And then all the press assembled Kelso to actually have John Belushi to have his picture taken with his down plane, which was his tail sticking out of the tar, but was actually an American B-17. But of course, no one knew that, and it looked like a Japanese plane. He actually became a hero.
And he's leaning up against it, and he looks at his hand, and the red paint, there's red paint on his hand, and he puts it back up. Kelso not even knowing that he didn't shoot down a real Japanese plane. The Douglas home was originally rigged to fall off the cliff, not because that was how the movie was going to end, but because Steven had this idea that during the shootout, when Ward was shooting at the submarine, all of his firing the anti-aircraft gun would destroy his own house, and the house would fall over during that gunfight.
And Bob said, the movie doesn't end really well. The movie has kind of a weak ending. It sort of tapers off and goes into a lot of dialogue. Why can't we end the entire film with the house falling off the cliff, Ward's house? So that's what we did.
I just want to remind us all that we're not going to let a bunch of treacherous enemy killjoys ruin our Christmas.
The entire house was on rollers. We had cables to hold the house in place so that it wouldn't go until we wanted it to. And for a little bit of insurance, we had an incline for the rollers to roll the house down. This happened to be the first time that I'd ever done this. And it was a one-shot. And to really be honest, it turned out better than I expected.
That's great.
And then Steven said, we got to have every single character in the movie converge at Ward's house, including the Nazi from the sub, including Meyer Mishkin, the agent. And he actually shot this thing where somehow von Kleinschmidt ended up in the Jap trap with Meyer Mishkin, and Meyer Mishkin wanted to sign him up to play Nazis in American movies. And there was no shortage of great ideas and great gags and great bits that everybody was coming up with. And it just turned out that we just had way too many endings, so we just started, Steven and Mike just started cutting stuff out because the movie didn't need it. The big payoff was, boom, the house falls down. What happens to Wally? What happens to Stillwell? What happens to the other main characters? Nobody really cared about what happened to von Kleinschmidt or Meyer Mishkin, so those bits were cut out. Although in the last helicopter shot in the movie, if you look carefully, you can see Slim Pickens and Christopher Lee in the shot, even though you don't see them in the shenanigans that went before.
Steve shot each scene complete by itself, and then we intercut in the editing room to figure out where we want to intercut, what we wanted to do. There was a lot of that going on. But that show was chock full of everything. And it was just a lot of fun to work on. It was my second show with Steven.
The first film he ever edited with me was Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And of course, he thought I was going to go off in some sort of esoteric artistic direction after Close Encounters, and instead I said, the next picture is this. So Mike had a great time cutting 41. It was one of the biggest challenges he's ever had. We had over 1 million feet of film exposed on 1941, and that's a lot of filing and cataloging and cutting. Well, I've always worked with John Williams on all but one film. And John, I think, has still to this date, the best march he ever wrote was for 1941. I actually prefer that march to the march he wrote for Raiders of the Lost Ark.
I felt, and Steven did also, that certain characters, I think especially John Belushi, that he should be characterized by a typical World War II American march of the kind that I grew up with as a child and played with even in school. And that march has a kind of jazzy, almost southern swagger to it. I mean, I can even say that in our minds, the American drill sergeant of World War II was always some guy from the Deep South, with a U-All accent and all this kind of very down-home swagger to him. And it's jazzy, and the accents are tilted, and the syncops are a little bit off, and it's a little bit impertinent in its character. Some of the kids with their uniforms were when they were soldiers, this kind of youth of this time, and the impertinence of it also. And so that it has fun, but yet it has a military aspect of the period.
Before 1941, I had experienced 3 sneak previews. Sugar Line Express, because it was a drama and you could hear a pin drop, nobody was expecting great, gouts of riotous laughter. So we had a very successful preview for Sugar Line Express because you wanted people to stay with the movie and not walk out, and everybody stayed, and we had no walkouts, and that was a good experience. Jaws was a through-the-roof phenomenal preview, which I'll always remember, as was Close Encounters, which was a phenomenal preview as well, with a big standing ovation at the end of the movie, at the end of Close Encounters. So I had found this one theater in Dallas, Texas, to be my good luck theater, called the Medallion Theater. Because we had previewed Sugarland there, we previewed Jaws there, and Close Encounters there. And I had 3 really great previews in that theater. So, of course, naturally, I wanted for good luck's sake, because most directors have superstitious, fragments to their natures. I wanted to do 41 there as well, and I did. But that preview wasn't like the first 3 previews. That was a preview where people laughed and tittered at the beginning of the film, and then as the film got noisier and more confusing and more riotous, the laughter became just kind of wonderment, and the wonderment became kind of amazement. And I even saw people holding their ears. I actually looked over the entire preview audience, and midway through the film, and I've never seen this before in a preview, audiences, at least 20% of the audience had their hands over their ears. I've seen audiences covering their eyes during Jaws, but never over their ears. That's a whole new experience for me. And I knew we were in trouble at that point. And of course, without the laughter and nobody laughing after 2 hours of a preview, when they're supposed to be laughing for 2 hours, you realize you're in a bit of hot water. And at the end of the preview, all the, Sid Sheinberg, to his credit, came over to me and put his arm around me and said, I think there's a movie somewhere in this mess. There's a really good movie, and we should go off and find it. The rest of the executives from Columbia and Universal didn't even want to talk to me. They were on the other side of the lobby, sort of in a huddle, but not the kind of huddle that you get from a winning team, but the kind of hangdog huddle you get from somebody who's going to have to, do a big, huge write-off. And so it was a very unhappy experience for all of us, I think, that sneak preview.
Well, they had a great premiere. And it was like an old Hollywood premiere with the searchlights and everything, and all these stars and all of these critics and the press and they hated it. And it was like a great premiere to go to because everybody, it was like this horrible thing. The press just hated it. And the audience didn't laugh or anything else, and they were all so snotty and everything, and it was a wonderful thing, and we didn't care. I remember that Belushi and Aykroyd were there, and they didn't give a damn. These people, he said, screw them if they can't take a joke. And it's wonderful now, having survived that night, to see this being done, to see that this movie's being re-released, and that everybody loves it now. Because when you go through a night that's that humiliating, you know it's for a purpose, Whom the gods want to honor, first they test.
Well, I felt responsible, felt like, you weren't able to, we missed connecting with the pop mentality of the nation. And it was kind of a strange time, too, because the film was one of those situations where the budget of the film was reviewed more than the movie, and that happens with a lot of big, expensive films that come out. But I'm still very proud of the outrageous nature. My feeling is that whenever you can have a scene that has Christopher Lee and Slim Pickens and Toshirô Mifune all acting together and all three of them speaking a different language, that makes my day. That makes me feel great.
A lot of the reviewers are real nasty to Steven. I think that they had set him up way too high in their minds as a god or something, or perhaps it's the natural human thing of when you build somebody up, then the next thing you want to do is tear them down. I think the movie is underappreciated. It is down in the history books as a big flop, but it wasn't a flop. The movie didn't make the kind of money that Steven's most successful movies have made, obviously, but the movie was by no means a flop, and both Universal and Columbia have come out of it just fine. So certainly there's a stigma that a lot of critics have against slapstick. The general public, I think, recognizes that the Three Stooges are great comedians, but there's an awful lot of critics that don't want to mention the Three Stooges in the same sentence as Charlie Chaplin.
We all knew that it wouldn't get good reviews. We knew when we made the movie that it was politically incorrect, and we loved it for that. Matter of fact, the term that we used at that time was social irresponsibility. And ask the Bobs about it, because they'll talk about social irresponsibility. We even had a Latin motto, civitas sine prudentia, which means a citizenry without prudence. And that was the idea, that it was this movie was truly socially irresponsible. And that's what we really loved about it. So we knew that critics would hate it because they were all gunning for Steven anyway.
I pretty much knew we didn't get the reviews on 41. And I read all the reviews about 5 years later, and I was fascinated with them. I thought they were really interesting reviews, and I was almost sorry I hadn't read them closer to the time the film. Charles E. Bryan was a wonderful lady who was the script person, held script for Jaws and Close Encounters in 1941. Then she died after 41 was over, and so I wanted to give her an acknowledgement.